He was a 35-year-old rancher who had chosen loneliness over heartbreak. But when 5 exhausted Apache women appeared at his gate, begging for shelter, his silent world changed. Among them, a 30-year-old warrior woman carried both pride and pain. In that forgotten corner of the Wild West, kindness became their salvation, and love their greatest rebellion. Let's get started. The wind swept across the empty plains, carrying the scent of sage and dust. The retired rancher sat on his porch, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. He hadn't spoken to another soul in months. His cattle were gone, his friends buried, and the ranch, once alive with noise and laughter, had grown silent. The years had carved loneliness into his face. But that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he saw 5 figures riding slowly toward him. They moved with purpose and grace, long shadows stretching across the dying light. At first, he thought they were drifters or travelers lost in the desert. But as they drew closer, he saw they were women, Apache women. Each wore a different colored dress, dusty and torn from travel. The leader, tall and steady-eyed, raised her hand in peace. "We mean no harm," she said softly. "We just need shelter." The rancher didn't speak, his guard instinctively rising. For years he'd lived by the code of caution, trust earned through sweat, not words. Yet something in their tired eyes made him hesitate before reaching for his rifle. Their horses were exhausted, their faces marked by hunger and exhaustion. He finally nodded. "You can stay," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Food's scarce, but there's enough for tonight." The women dismounted, grateful yet wary, and followed him to the porch. As he cooked beans over the fire, he noticed their quiet discipline. They spoke in low voices, helping one another, each gesture reflecting deep respect. Though they looked fragile in the firelight, he sensed a strength beneath their silence, one forged by hardship and endurance. When they finally sat to eat, he asked their names. The leader was Noya. Beside her were Tala, Sani, Muna, and Atsa. They had fled violence near the border, survivors of a raid that had destroyed their village. The rancher listened quietly, jaw tight. He'd seen too many senseless killings in his life. "You can rest here," he said simply, "but the land's hard. You'll have to work if you stay." Noya nodded. "We're used to work," she replied. For the first time in years, the old man felt something stir inside him, a faint sense of purpose. Days turned into weeks. The Apache women transformed the ranch. They repaired fences, gathered wood, and cooked meals that filled the empty house with warmth. Noya often wore a simple tan riding dress with a leather belt, practical yet graceful. Tala preferred a light blue skirt and vest, while Muna's green dress shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Their clothing, once tattered, became renewed through careful mending, each piece a small act of reclaiming dignity. The rancher, though, silent by nature, began to smile again, sometimes forgetting how empty the world had once felt. He taught them ranch work, how to drive cattle, mend saddles, and break horses. They learned quickly, their laughter returning to the dusty air. Each woman brought something different to the land. Noya's leadership, Tala's wit, Muna's gentleness, Atsa's skill with animals, and Sani's sharp eye for danger. Slowly, the ranch came alive again. The barn smelled of hay instead of rot, and the fields looked less like ruins. The rancher began to feel proud again, though he never said it aloud. He found himself standing taller, breathing easier, and sleeping without the weight of old regrets. One evening, as twilight settled, Noya joined him on the porch. The sunset painted her dress gold, and her hair caught the last of the light. "Why do you live alone?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Lost my family years ago. Thought the land was all I had left." She nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "We lost everything too, but sometimes what's left is enough to start again." Her words stayed with him long after she went inside. That night, For the first time in years, he dreamed not of loss, but of beginnings. Weeks later, a group of bounty hunters rode through the valley. They claimed to be looking for escaped prisoners, Apache women accused of stealing supplies from a nearby fort. The rancher's gut twisted as he realized they were talking about his guests. When they demanded to search his land, he stood his ground. "Ain't no fugitives here," he said firmly, hand resting on his revolver. The leader sneered, but the old rancher's steady eyes made them reconsider. They turned away, muttering threats. The women watched from the barn, their hearts pounding, gratitude shining in their eyes. After that day, something changed between them. The rancher was no longer just a host. He was their protector, and they were his family. Together, they reinforced the fences, stockpiled food, and trained with rifles. Noya insisted on helping him guard the land at night, sitting by the fire as coyotes howled in the distance. She spoke softly of her people, her childhood, and the dreams that war had stolen. He listened, saying little, but his silence carried respect. The loneliness that once haunted him had been replaced by a quiet, enduring companionship. As spring turned to summer, the ranch began to flourish again. The women's presence changed everything. The once bleak house now smelled of fresh bread, and the air was filled with laughter. Muna planted herbs near the porch, Tala traded leather goods in town, and Atsa tamed wild horses no man could handle. Their clothes became vibrant again, sewn with beads and fabric gifted by settlers who admired their skill. Each woman stood, strong in her own way, and together they formed something unbreakable. A community bound not by blood, but by trust. One hot afternoon, Noya collapsed from exhaustion while working the field. The rancher rushed to her side, cradling her head in his calloused hands. She looked up weakly, smiling. "I forget sometimes," she whispered, "that I'm not made of stone." He carried her inside, tending to her with care. For days he barely left her side, ensuring she ate and rested. When she finally recovered, she looked at him with something new in her eyes. Gratitude, yes, but also connection. In the silence between them, something unspoken grew, fragile but real. The women noticed the change. They teased Noya gently, and she would blush, pretending not to care. But the rancher treated all five with equal respect, his kindness steady and unwavering. To him, they were not burdens or strangers. They were the reason the ranch still stood. One evening, he gathered them all by the fire. "This land was dying," he said slowly. "Now it breathes again. You made that happen." For a man of few words, it was a confession of the heart. The women
exchanged glances, humbled by his sincerity. Summer storms swept across the plains, bringing rain and renewal. The group worked together, laughing as they chased runaway cattle through the mud. When lightning struck a nearby tree, they fought the fire side by side, soaked and breathless. Through every challenge, they stood united. That night, as thunder rolled across the valley, they huddled inside, telling stories by lamplight. The rancher watched them fondly, his heart full. For years he had lived as though life had ended long ago. Now, surrounded by strength and warmth, he realized he had been wrong. By autumn, word of the old rancher's unlikely household spread across the territory. Some mocked him for taking in Apache women. Others respected his courage. But he didn't care. His land was alive again, his spirit rekindled. The women, once outcasts, had found a home where no one judged them. Noya often stood beside him at dawn, watching the horizon. "We've come far," she would say. "We're not done yet," he'd reply with a faint smile. The bond they shared had become something deeper than survival, something built on mutual respect and quiet devotion. Years passed, but the ranch never lost its rhythm. The five women became legends in nearby towns, renowned for their courage, skill, and loyalty. Travelers passing through were greeted by a warm fire, a shared meal, and laughter that echoed through the valley. The rancher, once broken by solitude, became a symbol of kindness and resilience. He often said, "This ranch ain't mine anymore, it's ours." And he meant it. Together, they had built more than a home. had built hope in a land that had forgotten mercy. In the later years of his life, the rancher often sat beneath the big oak tree near the creek, watching the women ride across the plains. Their dresses, once torn and dull, now shimmered in sunlight. Vibrant blues, reds, and earth tones that matched the landscape itself. He smiled to see how far they had come, how much they had grown. They had saved his spirit as surely as he had saved their lives. Each day the wind carried laughter instead of silence, and the land seemed to hum with contentment. When he finally passed, the 5 women buried him beneath that oak tree. They marked his grave with a carved stone that read simply, "He gave us shelter. We gave him family." Every spring they returned to plant wildflowers around it, ensuring his resting place was never forgotten. Their lives continued, strong and full, but the ranch always held his memory. And in every sunrise and every whisper of wind through the fields, it felt as though he was still there, watching, proud, at peace. The land endured, just as they did. The ranch became known as 5 Sisters Rest, a place of refuge for those without a home. Travelers from far and wide spoke of the Apache women who had once begged for shelter and found something greater instead: redemption, purpose, and belonging. And though time would fade names and faces, the story of the retired rancher and his 5 brave guests lived on, a testament to compassion in a land where kindness was rarer than rain.